Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Andy's Little Homestead. Today, we're going to be working on some siding for the off-grid chicken house. And when I say we're going to be working on siding, I mean just me. My wife's insides are all jacked up, even though she's pretty looking.
Really? You gotta say that?
So she's going to sit inside in front of a window, read a book, and I'm going to do manly stuff and give her sinful thoughts. As you can see, we already got a little bit done. I didn't film that part because I was still kind of working things out. So when I do the other side, I can act like I know what I'm doing, and y'all won't know the difference. For our siding, we're using this beautiful rough cut poplar. It came off the mill a few months ago, and it's not perfect, but construction as a whole is not about being perfect. It's about hiding your flaws. Just like that time up until you get married. Poplar historically was a popular choice for barn siding in this area for a simple reason. Well, it's still green, it cuts and works like a softwood. It'll grab hold of a nail and never let go. Not very rot resistant, but we're gonna paint it anyway, so it'll be fine. Now as we go through this, I'm gonna show y'all well, I'm gonna tell y'all the right way to do it, and then when I ignore the right way and do it my own way, I'll tell you why it works anyway. So let's get to work. First thing we gotta do, we gotta trim out this door. All right, so we got our two sides cut. We notched out the bottom of them to match the sill. So we just got to put them in place. And you might be thinking, cool, we'll put them in place. Stick a level on it and it'll look good. But that's not what we're gonna do. You see, working on this house is a lot like working on an old house. Nothing is plumb or level. And I got it as close as I could when I was building it, but I built it all with green lumber. Stuff moves, so we got to know how to hide it. So when I put this piece on, I'm not worried about this being perfectly plumb. What I am worried about is having the same gap between it and the outside trim board at the top and bottom. The reason being, I can fudge it this way or that way without it really being noticeable. But these little bitty siding pieces that are gonna go in here, gonna go in here. If they taper in one direction or another, it's gonna be really visible. So we're gonna do the same thing on that side against that window trim. Keep everything looking nice and even if it ain't perfect. All right, so we got those in place and I'm gonna show y'all what I was talking about. Down here, it's almost flush with that jamb. And then at the top, it tapers in just a little bit. Our gap between here is perfect. So visually, you won't see the difference unless you're looking for it. And if it all gets written off as bad carpentry, which, the important thing to remember is that we're not building a Taj Mahal. And if you call something rustic, it can just be crappy, but you have an excuse. So it's rustic. So now we'll get the top piece in place. There we go. So on the list of things that I'm doing that I wouldn't do if someone was paying me to do this, we're using a framing nailer for this. Ideally, you'd want to use like a coil siding nailer because they have much finer adjustments as it relates to the depth of the nail head, so you'd be able to keep from overdriving them or underdriving them. And in theory, a framing nailer has that function too, but in practice, some are gonna sink too deep. That's fine. That's why the good Lord give us caulk. So let's move on to the next part. So we got to run our first piece of siding, but before we do that, we have to run what's called a starter strip. If we put our bottom piece of siding on, just lay it flat and nail it up, it's not gonna have the same angle as the rest of them. And that's actually gonna throw off the angle of the second board. It'll be the third board by the time it starts looking right. So these boards are all more or less 8 inches wide, and I've got it set up for a 7-inch reveal. So basically I need to cut a 1-inch strip and run it all the way down the bottom, keeping it completely flush with the bottom of the girder. And there we go, our starter strip is on. There's some mild inconsistencies, but there's mild inconsistencies everywhere, and you're probably not gonna see it. I did forget one thing, I gotta get that corner trim on the end there. Normally on these corner trims, you'd have one board here and one board over there. Fun fact, didn't cut enough poplar for that. So I just installed a single 2x4 and shifted it out 2 inches so that it, makes a corner on the other side, kinda. Good enough for who it's for. You're not thinking sinful thoughts up there, are you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
There we go. So now we're ready to run our first course of siding. The siding gods done punished me for my sins and I blew out an O-ring on my framing nailer. So guess we're hand banging them now. Now, before we finish with this row, I want to show y'all one very important thing that I'm doing. In between all of these vertical joints in the siding, I've got a piece of flashing. Well, not really. I took down some tar paper and I sliced a roll off of it with the miter saw, and I'm tearing off little pieces. But what they do is they put a barrier in between each joint. It's joint flashing. So that if and when the caulking does fail, the water still can't get behind it. It'll hit that paper and then run back out the bottom. That way the siding stays watertight regardless of how good your caulk is. Can't do it for the corners, you're pretty dependent on your caulk there. But for the middle sections, it's a very simple thing that's gonna extend the life. So there's our bottom course of siding. Now let's talk about a couple of things that I did wrong or arguably could have done better. Wood siding doesn't generally rot from the face, it rots from the edges. So the best practice when installing it would be to prime this side and that side of that board that's inside that gap there. Because obviously when you paint it, it's not gonna get to it. This is your one opportunity to do it. I'm not worried about it all that much because one, it takes forever, and B, I'm pretty confident in my ability to use my caulk. Now the second thing that we did that's definitely gonna cause an argument, we face nailed it. In fact, we face nailed all of our siding. Ignore that one that's split. Sometimes they split. But see, there's two types of nailing when it comes to lap siding. You've got face nailing, which is on the outside, you got an exposed fastener, and then you have blind nailing, which is done up under the lip. So you would nail the very top edge and then the next lap would cover that. My personal opinion is just an opinion. If you're in a high wind area, go ahead and face nail it. Don't give the wind the opportunity to get up under there and rip it off. If you don't, you want to blind nail it. Unfortunately for us, we're working with green lumber. It's going to shrink and warp and move, and I want to have it as secure as possible. So as I run these up, I'm putting the next piece on and I'm nailing through both of them with my face nail. That also makes it easier if you have to replace stuff later because the nail head is accessible. You pull the nails on top and slide the piece out. Ultimately, doesn't really matter that much either way. It'll probably be fine. Remember, none of it matters because it's rustic. So now we've got to set our next course. A couple things to keep in mind. The bottom edge is the only one that matters. That's the only one that's visible. So the inconsistency in width of these doesn't matter. As long as it covers, it's fine. So we want to go exactly 7 inches up from this bottom edge to hit this bottom edge. To do that, we're going to use these little blocks that I made. The distance from the top of this to that little edge is exactly 7 inches. I made both of them exactly the same. So all I have to do is just hook that bottom edge up under the siding, screw it in. It's at angle so that water will run out if any gets in. It'll be able to hold the next board at the exact height that I need it. Now this next course starts with one that's gonna need a notch taken out of it to go under that sill. And with most siding related things, I don't really bother with measurements if I can just put the piece in place and mark it. So that's what we're gonna do. So now with that one in place, we can run the rest of this course out. There we go. So we actually went ahead and ran a few courses down that wall and everything's looking fairly straight so far. So when we did this, what I did was basically just stagger them every 2 feet back to land with a stud, and then I was able to run, you know, full 8-foot pieces all the way. Not that any of the boards were 8 feet to begin with. They're random lengths because that's how long the logs were, but that's fine, because all we had to pay for was diesel fuel to make them. Now it's my own personal opinion, but I really don't like seeing a repeated pattern all the way down. You see it a lot with like a big empty wall with no windows. It's got vinyl siding. You'll see the stair steps along the way, and I just think it looks like crap. My preference, go for random. So as you can see on this one, we did the same basic thing, but once we got up to the windows, we ended up kind of randomizing it. So all of it kind of flows together in a non-repeatable pattern. Again, personal preference, but we're on the right track. So from here, what we can do is we can do our 2 that are going to be notched out underneath these 2 windows. And that's essentially going to divide the wall up into 4 sections. A little one on the end, this big one here in the middle, this little guy, and that little sliver at the end. Carlos did actually help me with this, so that was nice. But for the little sections, it's easy enough to work along. Time for a little lunch break. I don't know if you're in for a fun fact, but in a certain corner of North Carolina, I can't speak for other places, they're pronounced Vienna sausages.
They're Vienna sausages.
Mind your business, I know how to talk.
No, you don't.
All right, so the last thing that I want to show you guys is actually really important to making siding look good. And that has to do with any time that you have an opening like a door or a window, you have to make the siding match from one side to another. Now it's an easy thought that you know, would be the exact same. You're using a jig every single time, but it always shifts in some kind of way. Hammer knocks us something, move, whatever the case may be. So you want to match it up. So in order to do this effectively, what I do is I'll run one side all the way up to the top of the opening, and then the other side, I'll stop a couple courses short. So on this side, my last full piece is 7.5 inches from the top of the door frame to the bottom edge. Remember, everything's to the bottom edge because the widths vary. So from the top of this one, I'm 35 3/4 to the bottom edge. That means that the total space I need to make up to bring them to even is 28 1/4. Now every board that I add to here has a 7-inch reveal, which leaves me with an extra 1/4 inch. So all I'm gonna do is on the next 4, I'm gonna add just a hair, just a 1/16 of an inch to each reveal. That's gonna bring them up evenly, and then at the top, I won't end up with a gap, and I won't end up with the long piece that goes across looking wonky. Now that was only a 1/4 of an inch because I'm dang near perfect at everything that I do. Okay, all right, you can stop laughing now. But with that method, you can make up, I mean, 4 boards, you can make up a whole entire inch and you'll never see it. That's really helpful in situations like what we got over here, where these 2 boards had a strong bow to them. We were able to fudge it out and you'll never know the difference. It's worth mentioning that if I was doing this the right way, I would have a piece of flashing up behind here that would wrap over. But I think we're far enough under the overhang and I really don't care that much. All right, y'all, it looks like we're starting to get rained out, but that's okay. Y'all pretty much got the point. We're gonna keep on running up all the way to the top. For anybody who's wondering about around the rafters, a rough cut 2x4 block fits in perfectly. I didn't plan it, but it worked out really well. Just because you're dealing with an imperfect material like rough cut siding, for example, doesn't mean that it has to look like crap. And in a roundabout way, I guess there is a difference between looking rustic and looking I like to think that I toe that line real closely. There's things that we could have done to make it look better, or you know, be more water resistant or whatever. But here's the thing. I would take this with a coat of paint on it over modern OSB wrapped, taped, and vinyl siding put on top of it. 100% all day. We're not gonna look back in 100 years and think, man, that was a good time in construction history. It's all gonna get baked out in 20 years and have to get replaced. But if I keep a coat of paint on this, it'll last forever. And that is something I can be happy about. As always, I hope y'all enjoyed and I hope you learned something. I love you and God bless. Andy, did you really use synchronails to put that siding on? Yep, sure did. That's what I got. It was good enough for your grandpa. It's good enough for me. Plus, after the paint fades a little bit, you'll have the little rust stains that come down. It's gonna be beautiful. So rustic.